This week on In Conversation, we have in the studio lawyer and privacy consultant Michael Power. Michael, thanks for coming.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Just to start with, I wanted to posit, particularly among IT professionals, there seems to be a tendency to confuse security tools with privacy.
I can see how that can happen. For the most part, when you think about privacy, you think of adherence to roughly 9 or 10 internationally recognized general privacy principles, of which security or having appropriate safeguards is an important component. But when you think about security, you think about data at rest, data in motion, either to or from an organization or held within the organization. That's what security is usually considered. Privacy, though, is broader because you have to think about the purposes. You have to think about consent in terms of how to collect the information. You have to think in terms of access. Also, when you think about security, you tend to think in the general terms of confidentiality, integrity, data integrity, and availability. Whereas, as I mentioned, privacy is much broader than that.
Yeah, I kind of look at it as security being a tool set. Privacy is more of a principle.
I think when you think about privacy, you have to think about the entire life cycle of personal information as opposed to confidential information, which personal information is a subset of, but it also includes, the business information of the organization. And so when you think about it, security, very important component of privacy, but privacy, again, is much broader. It's the life cycle of information concerning the collection, use, disclosure, retention, and ultimate disposition. Security comes into a number of those components, but not necessarily all of them.
Now, when we were speaking a little earlier, we were talking about Webb 2.0 and the differing attitudes towards security among, I guess, the pre-Webb 2.0 generation and the Webb 2.0 generation. Could you go into that a little bit?
Well, in the context of privacy, I think if you think of the pre-2.0 generation, people tend to equate privacy with confidentiality. So if it's intended to be private, it's usually kept confidential or kept secret. Post 2.0, the post 2.0 generation tends to think more about privacy in terms of the control of the information. So they may put the information out for a particular purpose, but if it's used for another purpose or an inappropriate purpose without their consent, then they consider that a violation of privacy. A pre-2.0 generational person, such as myself, would probably say, well, it's out there and it's public, so you can't really assert any kind of claim of privacy. But what we're seeing is that the concept and notion of privacy appears to be evolving from secrecy to more about control of the information.
And I would argue in the context of Facebook, for example, that it's the responsibility of the person putting that information out there to control the use of that information.
Well, Facebook's a complicated example because when you read the privacy policy and you look at you try to operationalize or use the privacy controls, not everybody's comfortable doing that, and not everybody understands the implications of putting it out. And Facebook, people generally are intending to share it with their friends. They're not necessarily intending to share it with the thousands of third-party developers that Facebook has developing applications for their platform. So if people understood that a little better, then you might see that they may or may not put their personal information out there. So there's a question of whether there is an appropriate, an informed, a knowledgeable consent, if you will, when people put their information, when they agree to Facebook's privacy policy and put their information on Facebook.
I don't think that the average person, after reading that privacy policy, is going to make that connection that use of your personal information is Facebook's business model.
I probably would agree with you. And that's probably one of the most useful side effects of the Federal Privacy Commissioner's investigation of Facebook last year, was a lot of these issues came to light. and then a lot of people are looking a little more critically at Facebook and what Facebook does or does not do with their personal information.
You had a great blog posting, Michael, about explaining privacy to a 4-year-old. Tell us a little bit how that came about, maybe a few of the principles as you explain it to.
That was a funny thing. That happened as a result of a conversation I had with a colleague at a coffee house, and we were talking about understanding privacy, trying to explain privacy to people, because privacy can mean a lot of different things to different people. And you know, our discussion about the pre and post 2.0 generations is probably one illustration of that. And I got asked a question that stopped me dead in my tracks, which is, well, you know, how would you explain it to a 4-year-old? How would you explain it simply to somebody? And I didn't have an answer, but I thought, well, that might make a good blog post. So I went away and thought about it and tried to find an appropriate analogy so that perhaps it could be explained to a 4-year-old. And so I came across, I used Robert Fulghum's...
Everything I really needed to know I learned in kindergarten?
My mind went blank, but yes, that's it, thanks. And sort of used that, you know, suitably modified with appropriate apologies to Mr. Fulghum. And thought about it in the context of a scenario of a bunch of 4-year-olds having a play date and sharing toys. And if you sort of substitute personal information for toys, then a lot of the rules can be very simply explained. And a lot of it deals with respect, mutual respect, appropriate consideration of a person's dignity, because when you think about personal information, it really is about human dignity. You know, and in some respects, you can consider privacy almost as a human right. And it's, you know, when you think about the Charter and the case law that exists in Canada, it's not explicitly stated there, but it is embedded. And so, you know, simple concepts like, you know, ask first, you know, take care of it, you know, don't keep it forever. So now we're getting into the concepts of, you know, notice and consent, security, limiting retention, you know, don't play with all the toys, limiting access, limiting collection. So now you're getting into you know, a very simplified explanation of the basic privacy principles that govern the privacy laws in Canada and in the United States and in Europe. You know, the generally recognized privacy principles that underpin all data protection laws.
At the end of the day, are those toys mine, though?
Well, that's still an open question in many ways. We do have case law out of the Supreme Court of Canada in the 90s that basically says that the information is yours, but the record upon which it's recorded belongs to the organization or the individual that actually recorded it in that record. So there's, in a lot of ways, there's a duality to personal information. Yes, it may be yours, but keep in mind when we talk about personal information, it's not just the information that you provide to an organization, it's all the information that the organization has about you, including that which is generated. So it may be about you, but it may not necessarily be yours. You have a right of access to it, you have a right to require rectification or to challenge it. Doesn't mean that you're going to get it erased, but you may be able to put you know, a statement alongside disputing it so that the two pieces of information are read side by side so that people can understand the context and get a better perspective on you when they look at the personal information about you within that organization.
Yeah, that's a very difficult dichotomy to wrap your head around.
Privacy is a very complicated business, and when you start looking at the logical, legal, philosophical underpinnings of privacy, it's not as black and white as people think it is.
Thank you very much, Michael. I appreciate your coming by.
Thank you.
You can view the blog at the link posted below in the story, and thank you very much for watching.